Hi, everybody. It's Mira Morton, the Bossy Coach, coming at you on the night before Thanksgiving. And I hope some of you are able to join me live, but I wanted to leave this special recording here for those of you who aren't and who may find it tomorrow, perhaps when you need it even more. As you know, I like to focus on intuition, but also sometimes I just react to my intuition. And one of the things I wanted to talk about as a result of that was how to love your family during the holidays. I think most of us look forward to the holidays, find them to be a wonderful time, but it also can be a really challenging time. We end up getting locked up in houses with tons of family members. It can be a little bit of a pressure cooker. Sometimes the weather's bad, so you can't get outside. And as much as we love our families, so often we also, get driven crazy by them, right? It's kind of like what families for. So there's a ton of powerful tools that I learned as part of my coaching program and also just being a student of that program about relationships. I mean, so much of what people want coaching on is relationships. But I wanted to just spend a couple minutes today and kind of walk you through some quick ideas about relationships that you may not have considered that might provide you with some help tomorrow if you have any challenging relationships that you'll be dealing with on Thanksgiving. And then at the end, I have a little exercise that you can do tonight before you go to bed or tomorrow morning before everybody shows up at your house to try to get a little bit of perspective around the challenging relationship that in your life, and maybe things will go a little smoother. Maybe you'll feel a little bit better about them. So I hope it helps. The first thing I wanted to share with you is that your relationships are just your thoughts about other people. There's not actually anything that is a relationship outside of our thinking. We can actually have relationships with people who are not here. So we can have relationships with people who have died. We can have relationships with people we've never met because we can have really elaborate conversations with them in our minds. We have a lot of thoughts about them. And so if you're thinking about somebody all the time, you have a very active relationship with that person, even if that person is unaware of your relationship. So that's the first thing to know. Another example of this is that two people can have incredibly different relationships with the exact same person. So siblings, for example, can have very different relationships with a parent from each other. Parent is the same parent, right? But each sibling has a very different set of thoughts about the parent, perceives the parent differently. And so as a result, they have very different relationships because relationships are just our thoughts. And this alone is kind of a magical idea, right? Like we tend to think that our relationship is the product of that person's actions and our experiences with each other, but really it's our thoughts about what they do and not what they're actually doing that leads to the relationship that we have. So again, parent treating two kids the same, one kid sees that very differently than the other, and as a result, they have a different relationship because it's about their thoughts. So I wanted to kind of list some of the thoughts that I think in general kind of create trouble for us and angst for us that you may recognize, that you may see tomorrow as you're going about your day. And all of them tend to be some form of that person shouldn't be like that person shouldn't do that person shouldn't say that, or that person shouldn't think like that. Like we're always kind of arguing with who a person is. And whenever we're arguing with that in our mind, then we're going to have a negative emotion about that experience. But it can also just show up as things like they're wrong, right? So it's kind of like they shouldn't think like that. So if you end up in a political argument with somebody in your family tomorrow who doesn't share your same political beliefs, you can find yourself pushing against the way that they think and what they believe really hard, and that creates negative emotion for you. Again, it's not actually what they're doing, it's your thoughts about it that they shouldn't be thinking that make it so tough and so unpleasant for you. Things like they don't like me, right? Maybe you have in-laws and you feel like they've never welcomed you and they're cold to you. But again, it's the thought, they've never welcomed me. They treat me very coldly. Those thoughts create a lot of negative emotion, but they really don't have necessarily anything to do with how that person is behaving towards you. And in fact, they could be cold, like somebody might agree with you that they're not warm towards you. But if you didn't care, like if you didn't think that thought, they're cold to me and they shouldn't be, right, then it wouldn't be a problem for you. Like, oh, that's a kid, so they don't like me as well as they like their kid or their other daughter-in-law or whatever it is. So, and then another one is they aren't nice. Like they should be nice, they should be friendly. Maybe you have a cranky family member who isn't kind to you, or you think should be kinder to you than they are. So those are some examples of thoughts that might come up for you tomorrow in a challenging relationship. But again, it's the thoughts and not the people. And that's the thing to remember all the time, because, and the reason that's so important is you can't change other people, especially not on Thanksgiving. They're not all going to transform overnight. But you can watch what you're thinking and shift it slightly. And that's what we're going to get to at the end of this. So the second point I wanted to make is that your thoughts about other people reflect your expectations of them. And the reason thoughts are painful about other people sometimes is because we have an expectation of them that isn't really realistic. It's not based on what a person's going to do. It's based on what we want them to do. And we typically create these, we call them manuals. In my coach calls them a manual that we have for people. It's like a list of things that we want them to do. And the reason we create manuals for other people is because we believe that other people's actions determine how we feel. But as I've just talked about, it's not actually what they do that determines how we feel. It's what we think about what they do that determines how we feel. But when we don't know that, we create this like imaginary list of what it is that we want them to do so that we can feel good. And when they don't comply with our manuals, we get frustrated, we get angry, we get our feelings hurt, we have all sorts of things happen. And so I wanted to give you an example from my own life, because I realized I was kind of going into tomorrow, like I'm super excited about Thanksgiving and I love everyone that's coming, but I also had a little bit of trepidation about it. And so I started writing down, like, what did I think was going to happen? And I was like, okay, well, Grandpa might come and be like, no one ever listens to me. No one ever wants to hear my stories. And I've discovered that I tend to think that he thinks that. Regardless, he could say nothing. And I might just decide that that's what he's thinking. And then I have a thought about it, which is that, oh, Grandpa's never happy. And I also have kind of another thought that I don't tend to explicitly think, but it's kind of underneath that, which is that, like, it's my job to try to make people happy. And so the result is when I think, oh, Grandpa's never happy, I end up feeling frustrated, annoyed, worried. I feel the need to do something about it, right? And then as a result, I try to appease Grandpa, or maybe I try to control the other people at the table, try to listen extra hard to his stories, try to glare at my husband across the table like, hey, be interested in your dad, show him that you care, whatever. I do all sorts of wacky stuff where I try to control everyone at the table with my eyes and my mind. Super fun. But the result of all of that is not that Grandpa feels more loved or feels that people listen to his story. The result of all that is that I'm never happy. So I'm worried that he's never happy, and the result that I create for myself is that I'm never happy, which is no fun, right? I don't actually improve anything for him, and I just make it sucky for me. So this is why it's not awesome to continue to believe that other people control our feelings. It's much more powerful to realize, like, it's my thought that Grandpa's never happy, and that it's my responsibility to do something about it that makes the experience unpleasant for me and makes me feel like I need to do something about it, or like, oh, it would just be easier if he weren't there, right? Which is, of course, not what I want to think, because I do love him and I do want to see him. So one of the things I did before all this was brainstorm, well, what else could I think about this situation besides, oh God, he's never happy and I should try to fix that. Things like, of course he's saying that. Like, Grandpa is being Grandpa. Sometimes he complains that people don't listen to his stories. And honestly, people don't always listen to his stories. So he's not even like making it up. It's true. And maybe he has every right to be complaining about it. So of course he's saying that. Like, that's just Grandpa being Grandpa. It's just part of the experience of being with him. And it doesn't necessarily have to be something, if, like, as long as I don't feel the need to control it, it's fine. Like, it's only when I'm trying to stop that from being his experience that it becomes a problem for me. So another thing I like to tell myself along those lines is, what if his feelings and his behavior is not a problem? What if he just feels that way, and that's okay? And usually when I start to ask myself those questions and talk myself through it, I feel better. And I remind myself, like, it's not my job to make everybody have a magnificent experience. Like, it's my job to have a good time and help with the dinner, do all of those things. But everybody else's experience is their responsibility. My responsibility is my thoughts and my experience of it. And I ruin it by trying to control everyone else's experience. I ruin it for myself and I don't fix it for any of them. So you might have been kind of getting the idea here that people don't often do what we want. We have a manual for them, we have ways we want them to behave, and then they just rarely comply. Like even if they kind of do what we want, we tell them they're really kind, but they never get it 100%, right? Because people get to do whatever they want, grown-ups in particular, and they just so often don't follow our manuals for them. They don't actually want to be in charge of our feelings. They're terrible at complying with them. So I want you to know for sure that there's no way that the solution tomorrow is that no one brings up politics, no one criticizes you, no one complains, no one gets into an argument. Like that's not going to be what happens tomorrow. Like for sure, someone's going to bring up politics and disagree about it. Except maybe at our table. I think everybody will just vehemently agree at our table. But in most tables, there may be an argument that happens about that. Or someone is going to comment on your weight, or if you're single, they're going to ask you, hey, are you dating somebody? Like, why don't you have a boyfriend yet? I can't believe you don't have a child. Like, whatever it is that happens to you with the holidays, like, it's all going to happen. There's no preventing it. There's no wishing it away. There's no controlling. There's no response you can give that will stop it. It's just going to be part of your experience. But the thing that you can control is how you feel about that. And how you feel about that really gets back to the idea of a manual of, do you want to continue to expect that it's going to be different than you know it's going to be? Like, this is the insanity of our brains, right? So we know that, like, our mom is going to ask us why we don't have a boyfriend, and when are we going to have one, or when are we going to get pregnant, or, you know, we know that somebody in our family is going to play victim and try to make people feel guilty and get attention that way. But we know that somebody's going to show up and do that, and yet we continue to expect and want them to behave differently than they will. And that, my friends, is where all of the suffering comes from. Not from what they do, but from our expectation that they should be doing it differently than we know that they will. Like, you can feel justified, you can get a million people to agree with you that they should do it differently, but it doesn't make you feel any better because they're still not doing it differently, because people do whatever they want to do, right? So it's that difference between your expectation and what they're bound to do that creates your suffering. And if you're sitting there tomorrow and you're like, it's happening to me anyway, it's suffering. If you can just remember that, like, the only reason I'm suffering right now is because I want it to be different than it is. I'm asking this person to do something they're not capable of doing, at least not today. You can let go of a lot of that suffering. Like, oh, of course my mom's going to ask me if I have a boyfriend. Of course Aunt Martha is going to complain and whine that, you know, she didn't get the particular pumpkin pie that she wanted, even though she mentioned it 5 times. Like, whatever it is, of course that happened. Because, like, it happens every year, so of course it happened. And it's not a problem. Like, I don't need to do anything about it. Of course they did that. They didn't stop being themselves between last Thanksgiving and this one. And suddenly it just can be something that you watch and you can actually be kind of amused by it. Like, isn't it funny how this is how it always goes? Like, this is how our Thanksgiving is. Right? It's our big wacky family. It's like, these people over here fighting about politics at the end of the table, and your mom is like wishing that you would have a baby, and, you know, whatever. It's just the way that it goes. Grandpa's wishing that somebody would listen to his story. Maybe somebody even does, and he barely notices. But, like, that's just the wackiness of life and your family table. If you can get a little bit of perspective on that, you may find that the whole experience, without anybody needing to change, just becomes better. Because, again, your relationships with all of these people is your thoughts. It's not actually them. It's not their actions that determine how you feel about them. So what I wanted to leave you with was a little activity that you can do tonight. So if you have, it may be just the whole thing that is the thing you need to kind of write about, but, or there may be one particular person, which is kind of what I was experiencing. Although my feeling about the one person is that everybody else needs to do it differently so that that person will not be a problem, right? So everybody was involved. But I would like you to take a couple minutes and either write or type what your thoughts are about whoever you're feeling anxious, defensive, upset about seeing tomorrow. Like, what is it that you think is going to happen? And what do you feel about it? Like, what would you like to be different? How do you expect that it's going to go? Um, all of those things. Kind of get them out on paper just so you can see them. Because I was kind of like, I knew that I was a little bit not looking forward to that. Like, I had this thought, like, it might be nice if grandpa weren't there. And then I was like, why do I feel that way? Like, what do I think is going to happen? And that was when I realized it was because I was kind of expecting the scenario to play out. And then I was feeling the need to control for that in advance, right? So it's usually not until you write it down that you kind of get some insight into what's actually going on, like what your manual is for how the day is supposed to go, how that person's supposed to behave. So you want to write it down. And then kind of look at what do your thoughts reveal about what you expect, like what you want to have happen versus, so your expectations about how you think people should behave versus your expectations about how you actually think they're going to behave, right? Because it's that disconnect between what we want and what we know is going to happen that creates that anticipation of a negative experience. So you're already practicing, and in fact, without them being there, you're having a negative relationship with them ahead of time, right? And then you're going to have it again tomorrow when it all starts to play out in real life. So watching on paper, like, oh, I would like this person to be this way. They're not going to show up that way, and then I'm going to be annoyed about it. Like, that's the scenario I've got set up for myself. Writing that down and watching that will dramatically take the edge off of that experience tomorrow. Just knowing, like, oh, that's why this experience is upsetting to me every year, because I expect it and want it to go some way, and then it comes out a different way. So I hope that this is a helpful exercise for you. I really encourage you to write it down. I know everybody tries to do things in their heads. Writing it down is different. But just remembering that your relationship is something that exists in your thoughts. And that your thoughts, you're often thinking about people that you want them to be some way, and they're never going to live up to that expectation. And it is your disappointment about what you want them to do versus what they do that creates all of the negative feelings that you have that you think currently define your relationship with that person. And so if you're able to get a better sense of, okay, what is it that I expect of them? What are they realistically going to do? And maybe I can just let go of that expectation of them. You can just experience them in a different way. They can be an imperfect, messy human, like every human is. They can show up and do all the things. And you can allow them to just be who they are. Now you may need to set some boundaries with them, like maybe that person is crazy and angry and yelling at everyone, although really, it's not actually hurting you, right? But for the most part, you can just let people be who they are and just not be like, oh, of course they're doing that. That's grandpa being grandpa. That's Uncle Tony being Uncle Tony. Well, he's had a lot to drink, and now he's talking about politics. Here we go, right? And you can be amused by it and be interested in it and be curious to watch your family meal unfold in front of you instead of having it be, this is not going right. Nobody's doing what they're supposed to be doing. It always gets ruined. This person always ruins it, right? All of those thoughts create a very painful experience, but you have the choice to let those thoughts go and choose other ones that make the experience more enjoyable for you. So I would love to hear how your Thanksgiving go. If any of you try this exercise and find that it's helpful, please, please, please send me comments, send me an instant message. I would love to know. I'm certainly going to be using it. I've already done it for myself, and then I plan to kind of sit in the experience tomorrow. The last thing I would just tell you is if you get into the middle of the day and you totally bite the hook and you're deep up in it, don't beat yourself up about that. This is not something that we all become amazing at overnight. I'm still working on it. I've been practicing it for a while, right? So you can be having a tough experience. You don't want to layer beating yourself up for having a tough experience and not doing better at it. So at the very least, if you can watch yourself be like, well, it's not working this year, but I am seeing it a little differently than I saw it last year, and that's a win, right? That's good enough, right? And enjoy your Thanksgiving. So take care, everyone. I hope you found this helpful, and I will be back on Saturday with something new about intuition. So happy Thanksgiving.